are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar entitled The Power of Poverty Alleviation, Q&A with WBCSD about improving non-financial reporting. My name is Sandra Draheim and I am the marketing manager for the William Davidson Institute, who sponsors this free webinar series which showcases not only our latest work in the poverty reduction and impact assessment sectors, but also the work of our partners like the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. I invite you to submit your questions during this webinar session by typing them into the dialog box on your screen and then pressing send. Our presenters will then verbally answer as many questions as possible during the last part of today's one-hour session. It's very helpful if you are as specific as possible with any questions you submit. I am recording today's webinar and will provide all attendees with a link to it within 1 or 2 business days. Our guest presenter today is Kitrhona Cerri, Social Capital Manager of WBCSD's Redefining Value Program. She will share details about the program, including how her organization integrates social capital measurement and valuation into corporate performance management. Again, I remind you to please email your questions at any point during the presentation. I'll now turn over the presentation to Heather Esper, WDI's Impact Assessment Manager.
Hi everyone and welcome. We're very excited to have Kitrhona today to be talking with us about this new Redefining Value program that they have at WBCSD and just focusing a lot on the social capital side as she is their social capital manager. Today I just wanted to talk about the agenda really quick before I turn it over to Kitrhona. We first are going to go through, Kitrhona is going to give some background on the Redefining program as well as WBCSD, and then we're going to jump into a Q&A led by myself and with Kitrhona, and then we're going to open the questions out to the broader audience. So as Sandy said, please do send in questions because we will be taking them later. All right, well, Kitrhona, welcome, and I'll turn it to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Sandy. Hello, everyone, and a big thanks to the WDI for having me today. I'm really excited to share a bit more with you about our new program, Redefining Value, which has not been publicized too much yet from WBCSD. It's a really new effort, and I'm going to start with giving you a little bit of background on where we're coming from before leading into talking about the new program. So my name is Kitrhona Cerri. I wear 2 hats within the WBCSD. I sit within our social impact program, which works on a cross-cutting set of social issues, and I work on our new Redefining Value program, which really focuses on measurement, valuation, and reporting. And within that, I focus on the social side. So today, I'm very aware that the title of our webinar series is The Power of Poverty Assessment. You might be wondering a little bit about how this links up to the headline here, Redefining Value, and a big focus on corporate reporting and valuation. So I'll look throughout the session to enlighten you a little bit there. I'll start by introducing the WBCSD and talking a little bit about our roots in international development impact measurement, where business has come from in this practice. And then I'll broaden out to talk about how we're working to integrate that thinking within the heart of business operations. So the World Business Council, it's a small organization, about 50 people headquartered here in Geneva, where I'm talking to you from, but it represents a big group of multinational corporations, about 200 companies that are headquartered across 35 countries, covering 22 industries sectors. So you'll see some of the logos there. They're large corporations with $6 trillion market capitalization, over 15 million employees between them across the world. So, so we represent quite a hefty base. The great thing about WBCSD, which gives our work its power and its credibility, is that the organization is CEO-led. Our work is member-led and member-driven, which means that all of our work programs are driven by a board of CEOs and a working group of individuals within companies that do a lot of the work for us and really make sure that the outputs we produce are rooted in the reality of business operations. So beyond our core organization in Geneva, we also have a global network of national business councils. So we've got about 65 partners all around the world who feed into our work programs and also distribute them with their member companies within their own countries. So that brings us a little bit more reach on the ground in different specific geographic locations. So WBCSD works across this full spectrum of sustainability issues, environmental issues, social issues, and a lot of industry-specific issues as well. But today we're going to focus on social impact assessments. And I'll start by talking a little bit about the reason for social impact assessment featuring heavily within the work of WBCSD. Companies across the last 7 to 8 years have been increasingly motivated by this topic. They've been targeting, channeling more and more resources towards better understanding, measuring, and managing their social impacts. And the reason for that spreads across a spectrum from reducing their costs and risks to capturing broader opportunities. So they are struggling to obtain or maintain license to operate, particularly within developing countries. They're looking to improve the business enabling environment, the policy environment they're working in, but also the social and economic environment from which they draw their resources, their workers, their staff, their suppliers, etc. They're looking linked to that to strengthen their value chains, so increase their performance, stability, and capacity for growth. And along the spectrum towards capturing opportunity, they're looking to better understand the aspirations and incentives of their customers and to better target products and services that deliver to these social needs. So all these together really drive businesses to start thinking about how their operating models contribute to socioeconomic impacts, including poverty, including well-being, etc. And importantly, underlying that, how to measure those impacts. So we started our journey of impact measurement about 8 years ago, I'd say. And the first challenge that was faced by our companies was how to merge the two different perspectives, the business perspective and the development perspective, which is where the majority of impact assessment expertise had come from. So we did a piece of work with the IFC and a set of member companies, 24 member companies spread across sectors, to develop a measuring impact framework, which was published in 2008. It's a simple framework that walks through the steps a company can take that are flexible, that are metric agnostic at this point, to walk through measuring, defining what their impacts are, measuring those, gathering the data, engaging stakeholders, and making the relevant changes within their company. We worked with the IFC to link these to the IFC performance standards and make sure there was a solid body of indicators beneath that. And I'll share a link at the end of this presentation where you can look on our website, and there's a whole set of tools, resources, and case studies of how companies have used this framework over the last few years. Since the Measuring Impact Framework was published, the industry has developed quite significantly, and there are a huge amount of tools and resources now available for measuring and managing social and environmental impacts. The challenges our companies have been facing now are how to navigate such a busy landscape. There's such a diversity of tools. They're based on different assumptions, they offer different functionalities, they focus on different types of impacts, and they suit different strategic purposes of businesses. So our members were calling upon us to help them figure out what tools are most suitable for businesses in what circumstances. I included a little link in the bottom right-hand corner of this page to a resource which I find useful in general, just to highlight the plethora of tools that are out there. It's the Cerri Foundation Center, and they list and describe over 150 tools and resources for social impact measurements. So it just gives a flavor of what companies are faced with when they step into the space for the first time. So what we did last year was we came out with a simple guide for business for measuring socioeconomic impact. The guide outlines the business case and motivations. There's 4 points across the spectrum that I explained to you a few minutes ago. It outlines the basic terminology and theory behind impact assessment rooted in practice within the development sector. It profiles a selection of just 10 publicly available tools. We selected these tools because they were designed specifically for business and because they were being actively used and recommended by our member companies. So we narrowed down that broad framework to a relatively small framework for businesses to use as a starting point. And these 10 tools include the WBCSD measuring impact framework that I mentioned a moment ago, and the WDI base of the pyramid impact assessment framework within there. These 10 tools are all analyzed within the guide based on their strategic fits, what kind of purpose they serve within an organization, the level of analysis they focus on, are they project-focused tools, country-level tools, regional-level tools, etc. The kind of metrics and data requirements they look for, the target audience they're aimed at, and the level of effort and cost they require. And each of those tools is supported by a case study bringing to life how the tool has been used by a company and the benefits that it had. So that was quite a helpful guide for our companies and helped them to take a step into the space, give them the confidence to start interacting more with the topic of impact measurement. The guide also suggests some areas of focus to accelerate business efforts. And one of those areas was the need to better integrate socioeconomic impact measurement within business performance management and business decision making. So this brings us exactly onto what the Redefining Value Program is now looking at doing. So taking a step back from the individual tools and the nitty-gritty of impact measurement, WBCSD and our members have defined a long-term vision for reporting and measurement within a company. So traditional management within companies is obviously driven by financial capital. But what's missing in order to have real sustainable business practices is the consideration of natural capital and social capital impacts within that. So how companies can measure and manage their impacts and their dependencies on natural and social assets. Only once companies consider these items, sorry, my slides have stopped working. There we go. Only once companies consider those items can you really move towards true cost and true value management. So really internalizing the externalities that business cause on the environment and on society. And this is reflected within the strategic vision of WBCSD. We work towards a vision called Vision 2050, which is a world in which 9 billion people that are going to be on the Earth at that point in time live well within the limits of the planet. So a good level of living and well-being without the kind of impacts that we're having on the planet at this point in time. It defines a series of pathways of how we can achieve these goals. And throughout there, on the left-hand side, you can see sprinkled elements of true value, the fact that we need new measures of success, and the fact that we really need to understand the full impacts and value that business is bringing to society and to the planet. To bring that vision into reality, WBCSD is now working on the lower half of that diagram there. The must-haves that we need to achieve by 2020 in order to keep on a pathway towards achieving this vision in 2050. We're calling this initiative Action 2020, And we're working on 3 pillars to achieve it. The first one is business solutions, so the real tangible things that business can do in order to contribute to a sustainable society and planet. The collaboration that needs to be achieved to scale up these solutions with policymakers, development actors, civil society, etc. And along the bottom there, the business case that needs to be improved for business to really dedicate itself towards the level of transformation that's required for achieving this vision. And that's really where the Redefining Value Program sits. It's about helping business to understand its impacts on nature and society, to really integrate the management of those impacts within its core business decision-making, operations and reporting, and also to change the way that policies and incentives are structured within the business operating environment in general. So, the UN Global Compact and Accenture CEO study, which was conducted in 2013 and focuses on sustainability, found out that 93% of CEOs believe that sustainability will be extremely important to the future success of their business, but only 38% believe that they could accurately quantify the value of their sustainability efforts. This just highlights the level of the challenge that companies are facing. They know how important this topic is, but they really don't know how to begin to tackle it within their organizations. A further 37% see the lack of a link to business value as a barrier to accelerating progress. So without this clear link, without this ability to measure their social and environmental impacts, they can't really take action within their current operating structures. We're starting to see this changing. One real driver in this area is reporting. So WBCSD has done a piece of work called Reporting Matters, where we review all the sustainability reports of our member companies, but looking at reporting not as an end in itself, but as a means to an end in thinking and communicating on the social and environmental impacts of your company. So this piece of work links to the broader movement within the industry towards integrated reporting. So we've been working closely with the Integrated Reporting Council on a new framework for companies to draw together their sustainability reports with their core business reports. And they look at doing this by taking new types of capital into consideration alongside financial capital. So they define 6 types of capital, but the ones that are really important for us here today are the human, social and relationship capital, and natural capitals. So what the integrating reporting framework does is it helps companies to describe how it uses these different types of capitals within its business model and how it transforms them through its operating processes. There's drivers further within the reporting world, I would say, from SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Boards, which are operating in the US and coming out with accounting standards and sector guides focused on internalizing your external impacts. The Global Reporting Initiative is strengthening its focus on materiality in its new G4 guidelines. And in the EU, legislation was passed last April which required member businesses over 500 employees to disclose their sustainability performance. So you're starting to see a regulatory drive towards better and more integrated reporting. However, there are components within a management and reporting landscape which are not fully reflected. We can see in this diagram that reporting is somewhat the icing to the cake. And it needs to be underpinned by principles, by internal management tools, by measurement tools and methodologies, and by measures and data. So we have all those existing systems embedded within companies for the financial side, but what's missing is systems for the sustainability side to understand our social impacts as we walk through the day-to-day processes within business. So we need to think of moving towards more integrated reporting, but to underpin that, we need internal management decision-making tools that consider social impacts. We need measurement tools and methodologies that feed into those decision-making tools, and we need measures and data, which causes a bit of a challenge to companies because instead of focusing on inputs and outputs, this measurement and data needs to focus on outcomes and impacts, which are usually a step further from management considerations. So, with that in mind, the Redefining Value Program seeks to fulfill the objectives that are written out on this screen. The overall objective is to accelerate progress towards a world where more sustainable companies are recognized and rewarded, and therefore are more successful. It's what I was speaking about before, about really improving the business case for companies to move towards more sustainable operations. In order to do that, we need to integrate social and environmental impacts and dependencies into corporate performance management. We need to use that to improve the effectiveness of non-financial internal and external reporting. And both of those elements will help to better reflect the true value of a company and disclose true profit and true costs to stakeholders and to investors. In order to deliver this program, we've set up a structure which reflects the different elements that we need to work on. So up at the top there, you see the goal that we're working towards for 2050. True value, true cost, true profits in corporate decision-making and reporting. There are 3 work streams at the heart of this. The first one's working on implementing better reporting. That's continuing to collaborate with the IIRC and to work with our members on their integrated reporting framework and to using reporting really to the benefit of stakeholders and to the company, not as a nice to have or a glossy printout, which many of them currently are. To underpin that, we have a natural capital work stream and a social capital work stream. And these work streams, I'll go into this more in a second, we'll be working on consolidating the tools, processes, measures, and protocols, so to speak, that will be required within companies to standardize practice in this space and move towards better reporting which is embedded within business practices. Underlying all of this, we need a solid foundation to redefine value. So it's starting to think about the definitions we use, the terminology, the expectations placed on business, so we can agree on some core foundations which inform the broader practice. We're thinking about things like the definition of what value means for an organization, what materiality means, what are the limits of business responsibility, etc. And then along the sides of these programs, we've got 2 pillars, one focusing on education and capacity building. So we're working with academia and corporate training programs to start shifting the thinking, bringing this best practice into organizations, into MBA programs, etc. And on the right side, we've got a pillar that focuses on changing rules of the game. It's early days for this side of the program yet, and this is one area which will evolve as the practice evolves, but this is really about working with other stakeholders and in particular policymakers to drive the incentives and the external rules and regulations that will move companies towards better practices. So a last slide from me to focus in a little bit more depth on that natural and social capital protocol element. So this is what I, in particular, will be working on within our social impact work stream, and one of my colleagues is working on already with the Social Capital Coalition, which you may have heard of, that has already set up an initiative with a broad range of actors across civil society, specialist organizations, consultancies, and the WBCSD to begin the development of the Social Capital Protocol. So we're using the terms protocol to talk about harmonized measurement and valuation approaches required by business to move towards integrated performance management and decision making. So we're thinking that these will consist of a framework which would outline the purpose of the protocol, why it's needed, the kind of measurement principles that underpin it, the scope and boundaries of measurements that a company should be thinking of, and an overview of the components below. It will basically be a step-by-step process, standardized process that companies should follow in order to measure, manage, and potentially value their social impacts. Underpinning that, we need practical methodologies and guidelines for measurement and potentially evaluation. So you'll have heard of the emerging practice towards social and environmental profit and loss accounting, but also other measurement approaches that are currently in existence. Some of the tools that we speak about in our Measuring Socioeconomic Impact Guide, life cycle analysis that's building in both environmental and social spheres. And those practical methodologies and guidelines need to be supported by standardized metrics and data. So continue to work with partners such as the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, the Global Reporting Initiative, IRIS, etc., to integrate metrics and look for broader partners to help businesses reach that outcome and impact data that they need to get hold of. Underpinning those top-down elements, which outline the framework and tools, we'll be working within WBCSD on bottom-up elements. So for each of those areas that you see along the bottom of the screen, defining what these mean for business, how you'll measure them specifically, what the business responsibilities are, how they can be integrated together and where they fit within different organizations, what metrics to use, etc., etc. And also what all this means within specific industries. So as you can see, it's a fairly broad scope of work that we're taking on, but the good news is that we're not starting from scratch. There's a huge amount of ongoing efforts amongst our companies and amongst partners. And we're really looking to act as a platform to bring all this together and start to generate conversation and collaboration to move towards a more standard and more harmonized business practice in this area. So I'm sure I've left plenty of questions to be answered. I wanted to leave you with two links here. One's to our social impact page in WBCSD, and the second is to our toolbox, so you can see the array of measurement tools across both the natural and the social side that we have in WBCSD as well. So some practical things you can get your hands on. And yeah, back to Heather for questions.
Great. Many thanks, Kitrhona. This was very exciting, and I think we all have a lot of questions about what this might look like. I know it's really early, and you guys are in the planning stages, and there's a lot of work still to be done. So one of the first questions that we had, and this combines a question that was emailed to us ahead of time, was what could integrating natural and social capital measurement and valuation into corporate performance management look like? And along with that, the question that we got emailed ahead of time was maybe some examples of ways to tie the social and non-financial success back to financial/business outputs.
Great, yeah, good question. So the first part, what could integrating natural and social capital measurement look into performance measurement and management look like? We're starting to see this come to life a little bit in companies, and we're doing a little bit of work on exactly how this should be framed at the moment. So it's really about linking it into companies' standard performance management processes, which tends to go through a plan, do, check, act cycle is the way it's usually conceptualized. So companies define the issues they're going to deal with, they set their objectives and targets in the planning phase. They move to doing, where they define KPIs, align with existing processes, and engage all their employees. They then check their performance, so they measure those indicators. And then they act, so they use this in challenging their strategy and optimizing their operations and making their decisions. So it's really about taking your sustainability goals, your social impact goals, or your poverty alleviation goals, and integrating those at each stage within that business management process. So alongside your regular operational targets, you should have your sustainability targets embedded in there. When you set your sustainability strategy, you do it alongside your organizational strategy. So you start to bring these things together instead of having them living in separate worlds, or instead of tagging social impact on as a nice to have. So does that answer the first part of the question?
I think so.
Then the
second part of the question, do you remember?
It was around how they can tie non-financial success to business outputs?
Yes, financial/business outputs.
Great. So the best example I can think of is the integrated reporting framework, which is starting to help companies to think about their social capital impacts, their social capital dependencies, alongside their financial capital. So they think about financial inputs to their business and financial outputs. They also think about the social inputs and social outputs. And there's a few examples of companies who are, actually there's many examples of companies already doing this within their reports. So you can have a look and see how they articulate what their social dependencies and social outputs are. Companies such as Natura, a Brazilian cosmetics company, and Eni, an Italian mining company, ENI, they spring to mind as good examples. I think Akzo Nobel as well, and Fibria, a forestry and paper company. The chemical sector is becoming quite good, so DSM, BASF, Henkel, I believe. So these organizations are already starting to articulate exactly what their social dependencies and social outcomes mean for their core business operations.
Excellent. Many thanks for that. And while we're talking about examples, from your guys' background research, have you seen any examples of companies who have integrated performance management, decision-making for natural capital or for social capital, or done both together, natural and social capital?
Yes, definitely. Well, it's in bits and pieces, so there's a whole spectrum of activities, performance management activities that a company goes through in their day-to-day operations, and businesses are focusing on bits and pieces of those, so our remit is to bring them together. For some companies that are leading the way, a couple of examples from the cement sector actually. I've got a colleague, or one of our members, who says cement's a great example because they have quite a simple, straightforward business model. So they're extremely well placed to be leaders in integrating these kind of practices. And we see some great examples from Lafarge, for example. They've got a tool called their Sustainability Compass, which takes their sustainability strategy and translates it into KPIs and performance standards, which are turned into targets at the country manager level. So each country manager of their operations is driven by sustainability targets, has measures for those targets, and knows what good means, what median means, what their peers and benchmarks performance is. So that's a really nice example of integrating the thinking within an organization. Another one within the cement industry is Ambuja, which is the Indian subsidiary of Holcim. They've come out with the first environmental and social profit and loss account. So they've put financial value to their environmental and social impacts in their operations in India. Their annual report has a great description of this. They worked with KPMG on the process and methodology, and they're really using that analysis to look at, well, potential areas for regulation in the future and where their risks lie, where their most positive impacts lie, and where they can capitalize on that, etc. Other bits and pieces. There's Dow, for example, who have what they call their white book, which translates for all their employees what social sustainability targets they should have within each of their departments, who is responsible, what it means in your role, etc. So they really go down to the operational level with sustainability targets. There's Mitsubishi, which screens all its investments based on sustainability criteria. So there's different best practices emerging within companies and slightly different perspectives that companies take. So it's a case now of bringing all this wealth of experience together and thinking about what could be transferable across companies and across industries as best practice and to move towards standards.
Excellent. Those examples are really helpful. It's exciting to hear about the pioneers that are leading some of these efforts on measuring these types of metrics. The next question, oh, go ahead.
No, sorry, go on. Sorry.
The next question that we had was around kind of how will the Redefining Value Program help accelerate progress to this world where more sustainable companies are recognized and rewarded? What are some of the things that you guys are planning or thinking about doing to help make sure that they're recognized and rewarded for having this kinds of information and reporting on it?
Well, I think it's really trying to provide the practical tools, because the difficulty at the moment in setting any standards and driving any policy is the breadth of different practices out there. So once we have some standardized tools and standardized approaches, then you can start building better assurance processes, better audit processes, and that'll be a basis for stronger regulation or stronger incentives for companies to improve their performance. So I think our role is to bring together businesses to really see what makes sense for business, what can be standardized, to bring the practical knowledge, and then to advocate based on that to broader stakeholders such as academia, policymakers, consumers, civil society organizations to see how this can be broadened out and integrated into a wider incentive system.
That makes a lot of sense. During your presentation, you talked a lot about some of the challenges that member companies, or just in general, that the broader sector is facing in measurement. And some of the things you talked about were this lack of guidance. There's lots of tools out there, as you mentioned. You referred to Tracy and whatnot. And then you talked about some of the things that need to be done on your slide 15, which is kind of helping with internal management, decision making, these kind of creating some of these tools and methodologies, and then creating some measures and data. Are there any other major challenges you see in your member companies in collecting and sharing impact data? And at the same time, in your opinion, are there any other big gaps in the impact measurement sector as a whole to support companies in such measurement, or are those things that you kind of covered capture that?
Yeah, I think one of maybe three challenges. One of the first ones is defining scope and materiality. So what's really important for a company to measure, and how far along do they have to go? For the development sector in particular, the gold standard is impact measurement, but that's a long-term measurement, and it's measuring elements that are usually far outside of business's core operations. So it's about understanding how far to go getting the skills within business to start conceptualizing what that means, what level of influence a company has on that impact and how much can be attributed back to the company, and getting hold of the data, which is usually outside of the company's remit as well. So that's a real gap in the industry of partners for companies to go to get hold of reliable data, particularly in developing countries, and ways to collaborate on that data so it's not a huge investment each time around. The second area there is around aggregating that information, because you then end up with a huge amount of information, which is often comparing apples and oranges. So how do you bring it back into the organization and make it make sense? Someone who firmly has a business hat on and is used to dealing with financial information. A lot of companies I mentioned with the environmental and social profit and loss accounting are looking towards monetization, but on the social side in particular, monetization comes with a lot of sensitivities. So how do we navigate that? Where does it make sense to normalize these metrics, and where do we have to have different approaches to standardization and integration into business decision making? So yeah, two big challenges. One, deciding influence, getting hold of that data, and then making it really make sense for the business.
Yep. Very true. The last question I'm going to ask before we open up to questions from the audience is around, maybe if you could share more about your WBCSD's decision making and how you guys came up with the social and natural capital priority areas to focus on for phase one, and which we kind of see as those on slide 18 at the bottom. So human rights, water, ecosystems, and land use. And then the follow-up question to that also is, do you guys see yourselves focusing on other areas in future phases?
Yeah, so I skimmed over this a little. It's linked to our organizational strategy, the Vision 2050 process and the Action 2020 process. So as part of Action 2020, which really was developed over the last year, we worked with the Stockholm Resilience Institute and with our member companies, obviously, to come up with a set of priority areas that are really important for us to focus on in order to achieve the vision of a sustainable world in the year 2050. So through that process, we looked at the planetary boundaries model, and we also looked at the trends and measures and standards that are out there on the social side, mostly from development sector actors, and worked with the World Bank, the IFC, Oxfam, etc., to help us define our goals on the social side. So we came up with priority areas, and those define our work programs, and they also define areas which we're thinking about focusing on for measurement as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Oh, go ahead.
The second part of that on subsequent phases, I think these will keep us busy for a while. But we've also got the Sustainable Development Goals due to come out next year, and we're really keen to keep in alignment with that.
Oh, that's a perfect tie-in to a question from the audience. Someone was asking, this is the question as written, and then I think it ties nicely to the sustainable, the targets that are coming out of the UN. But the question is it just an internal methodology, or are your targets linked to IPCC or UN targets to avoid the tipping point? And how scientific are these targets? So you just referenced that you guys are going to try to see what with the new goals that are coming out, how to tie some of this to that. Is that true?
Yeah, so in Action 2020 we worked with the Stockholm Resilience Center, and on our climate change program we worked closely with IPCC as well. They all just came back from the climate conference in New York. And of course our member companies, especially the large emitters amongst our members, are very close and very concerned about that world. So the idea is that the work is rooted as closely as possible in science, where that science exists and where it's practical enough for business to get their hands around it. So a lot of our work in the last year has been sitting down with academics and with scientists and the set of business actors and trying to translate that language into something, what that means for business operations and targets that are meaningful to business. So yeah, we certainly try and ground it in science and work with partners to provide some credibility to that.
Excellent. And then the next question we have from the audience is, do you work with COSA at all, which is the Committee on Sustainability Alliance? The person says, I would see its work as important in setting standards in the rural livelihoods area.
I'm not sure off the top of my head. I'll look into it though.
No worries. We at WDI, we have recently had some conversations with COSA that have been really helpful on from our end with some work we're doing with smallholder farmers in Kenya. And it's been helpful just to see what kind of metrics they use and standards they have. But that is just on a side note.
Fantastic. Yeah, our rural livelihoods work has started from a project with member companies where we're bringing together a set of members who are working in the same rural area to bring together their activities and help, let's say, capitalize on their core business capabilities rather than going far beyond their business capabilities to deal with social impacts at the moment. So we're bringing together the impact assessments that have been done by all these organizations. For example, Nestle and Syngenta, Novartis, and Unilever all do the same impact assessments in different areas. So we're looking at how they can work together better to use that data. But I think our next step will certainly be to reach out to partners in the rural livelihoods area as well.
Great. Yeah, very exciting. The next question, and I'm not seeing many other ones after this one, but it says, and I think this is a good question, is programs do not equal buy-in. So I'm assuming they're referencing the Redefining Value Program. So they're asking for examples of companies that buy in overall, I think, to the program.
Yeah, very good points. So in general, we have subgroups of members that work within each of our programs, and there's usually between 20 to 80 member companies in each initiative. But the Redefining Value initiative is one which has definitely the strongest member engagement across the board. We held a workshop here in Geneva to scope the initiative, to decide what it's going to be called and what the objective is and what we should focus on. And it was attended by 70 companies. And those are the ones who could come in person to Geneva. We've got a broader list of member companies who are involved. So it's at least half of our membership actively involved, and the other half is interested observers.
Excellent. And I suppose as more information comes out on the program and tools and methodologies are created and the business case is made, I think there will definitely be the buy-in element. That's when it will definitely increase.
Certainly. And different companies have different stakes in the game. So we have some companies that are really interested in the reporting side, some that are pushing to move towards valuation, some that want to work on corporate education and embedding it within their organizations. So there's a split across the board.
Excellent. So there is another question. People are kind of wondering, what are some of the current challenges in implementing the program?
It's pretty much what I was just talking about, the complex landscape that we face. Mm-hmm. So for all of our companies, many of them have slightly different motivations, different industry standards to deal with, and beyond that, there are a broad range of actors in the space. Looking at yourselves, just as an example, and all the work that you do, all the expertise you have in impact assessment, how do we draw upon that? How do we bring that together? How do we not replicate work that's already been done? So I think the biggest challenge we face is really navigating that landscape, bringing it together, and making sure that we're doing something that's useful and that's contributing and not replicating good existing work.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that is key. And a question that just came in was resources to look at after the call to research on their own. And I'll kind of answer some of this right now. But I think the two websites Kitrhona has up right now on the slide is definitely something very useful to look into more. I think also the Tracy website she referenced earlier in her presentation, which has a list of different tools and resources as well. It's a kind of, it's just the hard part of that one website, as she mentioned, is that there's so much there, it's kind of hard to navigate. So guidance is kind of needed for something like that. And then if we flip to the next slide, we have links to our past webinar series as well. And then for future webinars, I think those are some useful resources to stay engaged in this conversation as well. And then I'll turn it over to you if you have any ideas of other resources.
Yeah, and I think I scattered a few through the presentation. It's worth taking a look at the integrated reporting work. So I'm not sure if I included a link, but if you Google integrated reporting or International Integrated Reporting Council, the framework will pop up. That's really interesting. It's worth having a browse through the WBCSD website, and those two links that I provided are publications linked to a wealth of additional information. So that's a useful starting point, and I'm sure you'll have plenty to look at from there.
Agreed. And as everyone knows, as Sandy mentioned earlier in the presentation, the slides and the presentation will be shared within 1 to 2 business days after the webinar, after today. So you'll have all this to kind of dig in deeper if you want to. And of course, all of us are available for questions if you have more. I think we have one last question coming through, and then I think we'll wrap up. It says, how do you steer between the conflicting objectives of standardization for comparability and individual company relevance? So yeah, this is something I think a lot of people are starting to see, is that there's some standards, but then also companies have some individual metrics they want to target as well. And how do you balance between those two?
Yeah, exactly. That's a line that we'll have to tread as we develop. What we're thinking now is that the protocols, for example, the social and natural capital protocols, would be a series of steps companies should take, and they'll help you to define what's material for your company, what's most important for your company to measure and manage. And we probably look towards getting a suite or a database of metrics and starting to improve the availability of data, standardizing metrics in specific areas, but then each company would decide which areas are important for them. The challenge in moving towards standardization is that many companies are already doing something. They have metrics that are ingrained within their operations. So it's the balance between, okay, can you let go or tweak those metrics to align with what other companies are doing, and that's the ball's in our court to hold those negotiations.
True, true. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. I think we all learned a lot from you, and we're all very excited to see where Redefining Value Program heads, and stay tuned for new developments. Yes, so thank you.
Great, thank you.
So this concludes our webinar presentation for today. Thank you very much for attending, and we hope you found today's topic exciting and helpful as you consider your own organization's efforts in measuring poverty alleviation. Thank you to Kitrhona Cerri from WBCSD, as well as our own Heather Esper for presenting today. Again, the webinar has been recorded, and I will send out a link to the recording as well as the slide deck within 1 to 2 business days. This concludes today's session. Thank you.